Good morning, TriCities. I'm Karl Dye, and it's 9 o'clock on Friday, so it's time for Coffee with Karl. We'll get rolling here. We've got a great program set up today. We've got representatives from all three of our ports here in the TriCities. Excited to be joined today by Mr. Tim Arntzen, the Executive Director of the Port of Kennewick. Tim, good morning. I did get your title right? Executive Director?
Thank you.
Okay, I just want to make sure I did my research this morning and want to make sure I'm accurate. From the Port of Benton, we have Miles Thomas, who, boy, Miles, I am going to call you the Economic Development and Government Affairs Director.
Close enough. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. And last but very much not least, Gary Ballew, who is the Director of Economic Development for the Port of Pasco. Good morning, Gary.
Good morning. I prefer like economic development guy.
Okay. Well, we'll get kicked off with our coffee or mug discussion. And this one, I think I've rolled it out before, but it's a really cool handmade mug. I got it in a training session that I went to like a year and a half ago up in a great city named Spokane. And I got it from—
I've heard good things about that.
I have too. From Avista Utilities. They got like a cool leadership management, something where they bring people from economic development in to learn about electricity. Gary, I'm sure that if you haven't already done that, you'll be doing that soon. So I brought this mug this morning for Gary because I think he's got some news that he'll share with us. Let's go to Tim next. Tim, what are you drinking, or what's your mug this morning?
Well, let's see here. I will hold it up, get it in the screen. It's rather mundane. It's a stainless steel coffee mug that I bought recently at Yolks. Yolks is a quality store within the Port of Kennewick district, so I try to do much of my shopping within district. It's insulated, so when I go out and do my morning rounds feeding goats and chickens and the 6 dogs we have, it will keep my coffee warm because I do have quite a walk in the morning and I feel like I'm getting my exercise in. We live on a mini farm. So yeah, that's my story. It was $11.99 at Yolks.
All right, thanks, Tim. Let's go to Miles next. What do you got for a mug or coffee or a story we can kick off with there?
Well, I was told I have to represent. I'm not much of a sports fan, but my fiance, on the other hand, is a huge Chicago Bears fan. So I'm representing for her today.
Nice. And I think in my limited research that I did 5 minutes before we came on this morning, I did see that, Miles, you might have been an alumni of the University of Illinois. Is that correct?
That is correct. I was hoping I could find my Illini mug, but it's MIA.
Okay. And Gary, how about you? I see your shirt and I know where you're alumni.
Got to represent for WSU.
Yeah. What do you got?
And then I'm actually drinking water out of this. This is my Ballew the Bear mug. So that's our namesake. And then representing the Port of Pasco for my coffee.
Awesome. Double fisting it. Good job. Way to get the day started, Gary. Well, let's start our discussion about ports. And I think in our discussion today, I'd like to start, real basic and just kind of get into what is a port in Washington and, maybe a little bit of history. And I think before we started here, Tim, you were told that you might be the best one to start off because I think Port of Kennewick is our first port, our oldest port in the Tri-Cities. So can you give us kind of an overview of ports and their role in the state and a little history, Tim?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Karl. And I appreciate the group kind of volunteering me to lead off. Port of Kennewick was formed in 1915, so we have been around quite some time. The legislation that authorized ports started a few years prior to that. And one of the reasons was because we were losing a lot of our waterfront to corporations and interests that, essentially took it out of public hands. So ports of Seattle, Tacoma, and those folks formed mainly for what you would think ports, would do, which is the heavy industry, the shipping, the railroad, the transportation access. But since that time, ports have developed over the years to become economic development engines. So we now have 75, 76 ports around the state. and you even have some of the smaller ones, Port of Warden, Port of Royal Slope, and they've actually become a pretty effective economic development engine. So with Port of Kennewick, for example, we don't do any shipping or, no rail like many of the other ports will do. What we do is we have kind of moved over the years into community revitalization. Our ports model is we'll buy lots from willing sellers, portions of the community that we think needs to have some reinvestment, and then we can go in and work with other development partners and put in infrastructure and then try to return those properties to where they can be sold to the private sector to build things that are of interest to the community. For example, we have a wine village, okay? And so when ports generally talk about we do economic development, the other things that ports have done are things that enhance the quality of life in your community. So the legislation that authorizes what ports can do is rather extensive. We can even run motels, we can get into the ferry service, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. So there's a lot of things that ports can do. And in my opinion, there's a whole bunch of different things that ports are doing, large and small. And I think it does make an overall substantial economic impact for our state. Many other states don't have ports in the way that we do. And you'll get folks from other states wanting to come and take a look at the Washington model and say, how can we duplicate that in our states? And just because I've told you a little bit about what Port of Kennewick does, I mean, we have our partner, I'm looking at Gary Ballew, one of the things they're really known for is the TriCities airport. And that's a very, very important thing for our community. So you can say, gee, Port of Kennewick's doing a wine village, Port of Benton has some short line rail, Port of Pasco has the major airport. It just kind of gives you a neat little snippet of what ports can do.
That's great, Tim. And I think your example of the states and other states kind of coming to see how Washington do it is a great example. Just me being new from Idaho only has one port, and the legislation from the state specifically talks about being a seaport. So in Idaho, there's only one place that has that status. But I guess being relatively new on the economic development side to Washington, I'll say that I think ports play such a unique role in a lot of those projects that you talk about and a lot of things we'll talk about today, because I think the ports within the public realm, same as like city or county. So they're, you guys have the ability to be supported by a tax base, but you've got some financing options and some other, like you said, management options and some things that you can do, maybe you shouldn't do or choose not to do, but they really open up all those opportunities in the whole spectrum of economic development. That's a good way to put it. I really appreciate that. Well, let's now that we know a little bit about ports, appreciate it, Tim. Let's kind of get into maybe some of the projects that are coming up or kind of a scope for each one of our parts, and we'll move over to Miles and maybe have him kick us off on this part of the discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would echo Tim and say too that the tri-ports, the Port of Kennewick, Port of Benton, and Port of Pasco are pretty unique in a lot of the things that we engage in. I guess we all have a little bit of a maritime focus with marinas or high docks, things like that, but we're all also involved in value-added agriculture, wine. We're on a broad spectrum of economic development opportunities in the community. I have Chucker Cherries here as my background today because we just finished their new facade over in Prosser, which is part of the Port of Benton's district. The Chucker is one of the oldest tenants of the ports, and they've been very engaged with all of our economic development opportunities. They're constantly expanding their facility and getting into new and very interesting areas of business. They are just a couple of blocks. This new facade is just a couple of blocks over from Vintner's Village, which we actually just finished fully occupying our Vintner Village development building. So Watoma Springs, Sister to Sister, the Prosser Economic Development Association, and several others have just moved into that building. Watoma, I know, is open for curbside pickup, and it's just been really interesting kind of working through this in the time of COVID and making sure that we're helping our businesses as much as we can to swivel for continuing to do business in a very interesting environment. One of the other things that we've really had the opportunity to do is clean up Kerr Butte Park. So Kerr Butte Park, that's one of the areas, recreation and parks that ports can be involved in if others are not interested or not currently involved in contracting for those facilities. We took over Kerr Butte Park several years ago, and we've been operating it ever since. Unfortunately, during COVID, we can't be open to campers. We have our day use and marina open, but until Benton County advances to the next phase, we're still not allowed to have campers there. However, that's given us a lot of time to make some drastic capital improvements to Kerr Butte Park that were really needed. We cleaned up, pruned, and replaced a decades-old irrigation system, fixed our sewer, and it's going to be really nice when we can reopen, which at this point I imagine is probably going to be next season, but it'll be nice and cleaned up for everybody when they are able to get outdoors again.
That's great. And I noticed that you used the word swivel instead of pivot. I appreciate that because I think we're all saying pivot too much. So swivel is a nice touch. I picked up on that, Miles. That's awesome. Gary, how about you? How about Port Pasco? So maybe some projects are kind of like your scope. Tim talked about the airport, of course, which is a huge, community asset. But
Yeah.
Where's
So-
from the Port? Yeah, go ahead.
So the Port Pasco's probably, I think, out of the three, probably closest to a traditional port, or what people think of as ports. We're really a transportation-focused port. Of course, we have TriCities Airport, and then our other major asset is Big Pasco, which is a World War II era series of warehouses, rail, barge terminal. So we do get traffic off the river. Not as much as we used to in the 90s. We're working on a couple, redevelopment projects. I'm in one today. That's Osprey Point, and so we're working to do development here. And then we have our marine terminal site, or what we're referring to as the wharf, which is right next to the cable bridge, and sort of kitty corner across from Tim's Clover Island, from Port of Kennewick's Clover Island, and so we'd like to get both of those going, but right now we're really focused on Osprey Point.
That's awesome. If you've just tuned into us on Zoom, I think we're having some technical difficulties with Facebook Live, but we'll put the recording up on Facebook. So if anybody's interested in it afterwards, if you're on Zoom and you want to ask a question, we'll use the question and answer box at the bottom. So if you have a question for our panelists from the ports today, you can put it in the chat down below, or question and answer, and we'll get to it. That was a great overview. I think, Tim, since you kicked us off with history, do you want to talk about some of the projects or a little bit of the focus for Port of Kennewick?
Yeah, I'd love to. We have a number of projects that we're looking to continue moving forward, and we do a 2-year budget and work plan. So I'll kind of maybe keep it within that framework of what we might see in the next 2 years. The big one that most people probably have heard about is Vista Field. That was the old general aviation airport in the center of Kennewick that closed down, lack of use. The Port Commission at the time, a number of years ago, decided to take it offline, and went through a community process to do that, went through a process on what it would look like afterwards. And we developed a master plan for redeveloping our community, 103 acres in there. It's a redevelopment of a town center. It's called New Urbanism. And New Urbanism, in a nutshell, is kind of like we used to do back in the 30s and 40s, when you had compact parts of your communities, narrow streets that were walkable as well as drivable, where you might have had shops on the lower floor along the main street, really well-developed main street, and then above you might have had an apartment or another building above. So you try to focus on bringing the downtowns back, if you will. So it's almost like so advanced that it just circles right back around to what we were doing primarily to World War II. And that's what we're going to do with Vista Field. There will be plenty of opportunities for private sector investment. We have dirt for sale that's going to be starting to be, the for sale signs driven into the ground right after the first of the year. Phase one is infrastructure. We've got streets and sidewalks, utilities that would open up about a 20-acre parcel for what's called mixed use development. And that would be commercial type buildings, residential, et cetera. We're now shifting to Clover Island, which is in the eastern part of our community in Kennewick. We're completing an update of our master plan. We did a master plan out there, I want to say from 2004, 2005 era. We're updating that. There has been a lot of development on Clover Island over the years, but we figure now it's time to involve the community again and look at how we move things forward to maybe, crossing the finish line with Clover Island. We are also partnering with the city of Richland. A good portion of Richland is in the Port of Kennewick district. We're going to be helping them with Center Parkway to get the travel lanes over the railroad tracks, so then you have better access to the Tapteel area. We also partner with Benton County. They've been really good to release some of their economic development funds to the port for use on some of our community-based projects. We also deal with West Richland. We ended up transferring our 93-acre racetrack property to the city of West Richland because they have economic development plans that can move forward a little bit quicker than our plans would. We also work with a portion of Benton City. So you try to, kind of spread the love around, so to speak. But that's just kind of a quick flyover of some of the projects that we've got in front of us.
That's great. And I think I saw on your website that there is master planning activity that's coming up with community input or some public involvement. Is that going to be virtual, Tim, or do you have some details on that?
Yeah, I'm the last person at the Port of Kennewick
Okay.
who wants all the details because it's virtual. It's a lot of the tech stuff that I'm kind of old school, but Tana on my staff is working to get all of our, all of the opportunities for public comment out there to the public. Some will be via website. We've got a firm that we've used previously called Makers Architecture out of Seattle. They're doing a great job of doing the outreach. And, this is really one of the first projects for them that has been completely virtual. With COVID, you can't have the town hall meetings and ask 100 people to come in and sit down and give you their viewpoints on it. So they're doing it completely virtually. And when we were going into it, we were all like, oh my gosh, how's this going to work? What I'm hearing from them is that they're getting better public participation going completely virtual than they did the old school way. So that makes me happy.
Oh, that's great. And while we're on it, I just out of curiosity, what's the history of Clover Island? I mean, it's cool when I go to your office because you've got like a Coast Guard station there and obviously the marina, but was that, was Clover Island created through the Corps, maybe dredging activity or building the levees and stuff like that, or what's just kind of a brief history on Clover Island? How did that come about?
Well, prior to the dams, and in this case, McNary Dam downstream, this stretch of the Columbia was free flowing. If you look at some of the old maps, you'll see that there was a big island out there under the present day area of Clover Island. And with the free flowing river is probably an island that would flood and would change shape because the big powerful Columbia River scouring gravel around, but there was typically an island there. And then when the water level rose because of building McNary Dam downstream, I think in 1953, then folks came in, I believe it was initiated by the Corps first, to fill that area to create kind of a odd looking square little dab of an island with a causeway. And then over the years it was added to it to get it to its present configuration. So it is more or less a man-made island over the old remnants of the original island that was there prior to the dams. And there's a causeway to it, so it's not technically correct to call it an island. And we're doing some development there. And it does have the benefit of having a protected harbor for the marina we have. We have about 150 slips more or less. You've got the Clover Island Yacht Club. You've got some businesses there, Cedars, the Clover Island Inn, and Ice Harbor. And, so it originated from, an island made by the great creator, not by man. And then we've kind of added to it. And some would argue maybe we've made it better, maybe we haven't. But over the years, we have attempted to remediate some of the things that weren't very positive to the environment. We've been working with the tribes, we've worked with the community, state, federal grants, and we've actually tried to return the island to somewhat of a natural condition, and the tribes are thrilled because it does enhance the fisheries, and the fishermen are probably thrilled as well, because when you make a more natural shoreline, it helps the small salmon make it downstream with less predation. So that was a bit of a rambling answer to your, Karl asks a simple question and figures to get a simple answer from Tim, so sorry.
No, I appreciate that. So I'm really interested in history, and being a newcomer, just driving out there, I'm like, I wonder how this happened. And then, last week, a lot of us participated with Congressman Newhouse that was here and talking about River Shore Reconveyance. So we Monday had a lot of conversations about the core and levee creation and stuff like that. So it was just probably top of mind. Great explanation. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate Tim's really detailed explanation, just because he recognized so many of the partners that we work with on a regular basis. I know Tim works with the city of Kennewick, city of Richland, federal legislative folks. And I just wanted to recognize, TRIDEC, Visit TriCities, the Tri-City Regional Chamber have been such a value in the effort at recovery through COVID-19. Ports are restricted in the way that they can either gift or provide funds for recovery. And the Benton County CARES Act and Franklin County CARES Act funds that TRIDEC has been putting on is just really valuable to all of our tenants and businesses that we're doing work with. But I was going to jump over. I don't know if you're ready for this, Karl, but I saw in the Q&A that somebody was asking about the state legislature and how they could be more helpful to the economic development purposes. And one of the things, we have a really good relationship bipartisan with the legislature on port activities. But one of the things that we are constantly reaffirming through the legislature is that we need support through the ADOs like TRIDEC, the Associated Development Organizations, and we need support through CURB, the Community Economic Revitalization Board. All of these are such important tools to continue the projects that we do. Tim mentioned Benton County and how helpful that they've been to both the ports and the cities and providing economic development value and doing infrastructure projects that we just wouldn't otherwise be able to do on our own. So those partnerships are just so valuable.
That was really well said, Miles. And I just wrote myself a note that we have to create a Coffee with Karl t-shirt, because, when you're out there giving kudos to everybody, that kind of earns you, I think, a Coffee with Karl t-shirt. We'll have to create one first, but I've got it on my list here. So that was a
perfect.
Great answer to the question about how can the legislature be more helpful in connecting economic development with the ports. But Gary, do you have any else to add to that question regarding the legislature? And I also acknowledge that Gary is the incoming president or chairman. Chairman. I'm just making stuff up this morning.
That's okay.
The Washington Economic Development Association. So, very strong advocate for economic development, has a big pull with the legislature and does some lobbying and stuff. But do you have anything to add to that question about the legislature, Gary?
Yeah, so we work with them both WEDA, the Washington Economic Development Association, and then WPPA, which is the Washington Public Ports Association. Constantly working with the legislature, and one of the things is, I think one of the things that COVID really showed is that we shouldn't take our economy for granted. That's something TriCities knows pretty well, because it came out of really tough times, but those tough times were like 20 years ago. So a lot of people think, hey, we don't need to be doing these things. We have other more important things. And, when you're working at state funding, you're up against social programs, you're up against important things that help people. And so you have to kind of beat that drum to make sure people know that economic development is important, that we can't take the economy for granted. And I think that's the big thing with the legislatures is, prior to this last session, one of the caucuses didn't even have an economic plank. It was just saying, well, that just happens. So that's the big deal for the legislature, is just to understand the importance of it. And then Miles mentioned a couple of the big programs for us. CURB. We'd like to get tax increment financing, which is difficult in Washington State because of some constitutional stuff, but you can get there. And they had a program for a long time. We couldn't even use the terms tax increment financing, which is a common tool all across the state, real common where you come from, Karl, in Idaho. Used a lot down there, and used a lot in a lot of other states. And basically what you do is, if you have a new development, you take a portion of the tax revenue off that new development to pay for the infrastructure that helped create the new development. And so if you can do that, it's a real great way to finance some of these projects that we're trying to get done.
You bet. Okay, well, just to remind everybody again, if you do have a question like we just got into, you can use the question and answer box. Let's move on into something that I know Tim and I've spent some time talking about, and all the ports really play a really important role in this. But I think a part of economic development in general that doesn't come up a lot, but that is placemaking and kind of the community development tie into economic development. And I guess because we kind of live it every day, we throw these terms around pretty easily. But I'll just say, I think community development is looking at your whole community, not just the business side, but what does your community need to be able to facilitate growth? We're in economic development, we're all kind of talking about growth, job growth, business growth, facilitating that environment. But placemaking, that in today's world, pre-COVID, we all know that talent, okay, you land a new company starts in your community and then it grows. How are you going to get the right people with the right skills to line up to help your company grow? And a really important part of that is placemaking, is community development. And yesterday, Gary talked about WEDA, Washington Economic Development Alliance. On a call yesterday, Michael Novakovich from Visit TriCities was on, and he was a guest speaker, but he did such a good job of kind of phrasing this term. And he quoted, some peer of his from Texas or something that talked about, if you make a place that people want to visit, you'll have a place that people want to live. And if you have a place that people want to live, you'll have a place that businesses want to come to, because it's a great place to attract people to live. And I'm kind of butchering Michael's quote, but it's kind of this concept that we're in. But from the port's perspective, can each of you talk a little bit about, kind of adding to that amenity-based part of our economy, which, really rounds out our community, which enables us to do the very parts of economic development that we all do. And I don't know, maybe since Gary, you ended the last one, you want to kick that one off and we'll just go around?
Sure. Yeah. So no, it is important, and the TriCities has certainly struggled with that, with 3 equally sized cities and 3 small downtowns, and we're a population of like 300,000 people, and we don't have the central core area, which is where you get, in many cases, the identity of a community. I won't say who, but I asked somebody, well, what do you think is the architectural style that reflects the TriCities? And they said beige. So making those things, those places that are unique, is really important. And I'll say a couple deals on where Port of Pasco is working on that. One, I think the TriCities Airport. I think the renovations at the TriCities Airport, they really try to reflect the community in that. The river on the tile work, the river, you see all 3 rivers kind of running through the airport. They try to really reflect the natural environment and the agriculture. You see that in the art that's at the airport. And the airport's a really important gateway. So our commission really wanted something nice within budget, but something really nice and that would reflect well on the community. Because for many of our visitors, it's the first thing they see and it's the last thing they see. The other one for us is both Osprey Point and the wharf are places where we think we can create some unique environments. Now we're working with a private developer on Osprey Point. And that's one of the discussions we're having with them. It's like, okay, how do we, the development itself is cool, but how do we create this sense of place, what we call placemaking? And then on the wharf, we're working on that project. There's a large wooden wharf that runs parallel to the Columbia River. It's an old wharf built a long time ago, and we're doing studies and analysis to see what it's going to take to renovate that so it can be utilized, potentially with cruise ships, potentially with other traffic. But it's really where, since that's a levee protected area, that wharf becomes an important part of where the public can access the river, really be able to use the river. And that's another thing we've heard, whether like we did a study, regional study for Pasco called Somos Pasco, which is We Are Pasco, which was looking at an economic analysis. You hear it a lot with My Tri 2030, was people going, I want things to do along the river. The Tri-Cities has not really engaged the waterfront. There's some notable exceptions to that, but then we have some beautiful parks, but people also want those amenities, the restaurants, the things that Port of Kennewick is doing down at Clover Island, the things Port of Benton is doing up in North Richland. Those are real elements where people can really engage the waterfront and that stretch. So we have the Sacagawea Heritage Trail that runs around the entire Tri-Cities and along all the Columbia River. And the one stretch between Columbia Point and Howard Amon Park is the busiest part of that trail. It's also the most developed part of that trail. There's businesses along there, there's condos along there, so the sense of being able to do both, have this great natural waterfront, natural river, parks and open spaces part of the river, but also a developed part of the river. And I think that's really where the identity of the Tri-Cities is going to have to come from.
That's great. Thanks, Gary. Miles, how about Port of Benton? When you guys look at placemaking, you talked about the recreational aspect in the parks and stuff, but any other examples or work that you're doing out at Port of Benton?
Well, I'll kind of follow Gary. I mean, the Tri-Cities Airport is such an important value to the entire community because that's a lot. All the businesses that we're recruiting, the people that we want to move here, live here, and stay here for a long time, many of them, their first interaction is at the Tri-Cities Airport. And, with Visit Tri-Cities, I guess kind of pop-up visitors center within the airport, we all get kind of a firsthand look at all of the diversity in Tri-Cities, all of the opportunities. I think a lot of people ask, why are there 3 different ports? Why are there 3 different cities? But we all have such varied things to offer the community. And the airport, including the Richland Airport, which welcomes a lot of business travelers to North Richland, it is this place where we're recruiting people into our community. We're doing a lot of work in the Tri-Cities Research District, which effectively covers a large portion of North Richland, and many of the cities, many of the ports, our education, Washington State University, Tri-Cities, and CBC all participate in the Research District. And we have a lot of these vehicles like the Research District, Visit Tri-Cities, TRIDEC, that provide one voice for the differences between many of the cities. So it's really just a really great opportunity for us to collaborate. On the kind of recreation front, we work with a lot of tribal partners on our heritage management plan, the Sacagawea Heritage Trail that runs through North Richland, all the biking paths to bring people up to the USS Triton sail. There's just so many opportunities to engage people, and I think it's really interesting that the Heritage Trail runs through each of our main development areas, Clover Island, Osprey Point, North Richland Research District, just because it's a really cool connector between us all that we can showcase all the recreational and outdoor opportunities that the Tri-Cities has to offer, which kind of is the censure to get people to stay here and enjoy this community.
No, totally. That's very well said. And I was going to ask you too, Miles, from your LinkedIn profile, I think, are you still affiliated with like a local bike shop that is like or maybe it's like a co-op bike shop or something, as we're talking about biking and trails and stuff?
Yeah. So I was asked, so we moved here almost 6 years ago, and there was a group of folks that were really interested in starting a bicycle cooperative. And unfortunately the shop is closed except for by appointment on Saturdays right now, just because of COVID. But Wheelhouse Community Bike Shop is the name of the bike co-op. It's in downtown Kennewick, just a short bike ride from Clover Island. And it's a really cool space. So we provide for members and non-members alike an opportunity for people to learn how to work on their own bikes, rebuild bikes. We sell used bikes, nothing really new. But it's all very community-based. Prior to COVID, we did a lot more fun group rides on the Secretary Heritage Trail through all the communities. But I've served as board secretary for, I guess, about 3 years now. And it's just been a really interesting group to be a part of. And I've learned a lot about this community by cycling with these folks and sharing in the experience of knowing how to rebuild my own bike and fix my tire after I inevitably roll over a couple of goat heads.
That's awesome. And since Tim's our next up, we're talking about a different goat head than those ones that Tim's out there feeding, right? That's awesome. Thanks, Violet. Tim, how about this placemaking subject? And then we also had a question for you about if you could talk a little bit more about some of the options for follow-on development at a Vista Field. But I think Vista Field's a great example of this placemaking, right? And Gary talked about it, like, you know, what's the thing that we think of when we think of the Tri-Cities, and it seems like there's a great opportunity there at Vista Field and placemaking.
Yeah, thank you. You know, many years ago, I got a degree in geography from University of Oregon. And in that process, we learned about placemaking a little bit. And back in that time frame, I was like, just get me out of here. I want to get a degree, get going. And so, you know, I remember that term now, many years later, of placemaking. I tried to remember back to what the professors were trying to teach me. And what I think it means, at least to me, is we can all probably identify a very special place that we've been to. And it more than anything, it gives you a feeling. And you say, I like that place. And if you tell somebody about it, they might question you and say, well, why do you like it? And in many cases, you might say, well, I really don't know. You know, it's any number of things. And you try to describe it, and you can't really describe it in an analytical fashion, but you know you like it. It feels good. It feels comfortable. One of the places I like is Percival Landing in Olympia, because you can walk on the boardwalk, you sit on the benches there, and Olympia has a little bit of a, you know, small town feel to it. So we've all experienced these things, placemaking of something we like. And placemaking is more than just throwing up a series of buildings, a strip mall, and calling it a place where you can get anything you need. So placemaking to me has to have the physical aspect of, okay, it is a place with a series of buildings, a boardwalk, benches. So I guess you do have to describe particular things that you like about it. But more than that, to me, I think when you're successful at placemaking, it has to have this feeling where you say, I like it. Don't hassle me on why I like it. I like it. For me, back when we could travel a little bit, I'd go to, you know, all the way from my house in Rancho Riata all the way back down to Clover Island to go have a cold drink and some chicken wings sitting out on the porch at Ice Harbor, because that was a little bit of placemaking. Got a longer way to go on Clover Island. So placemaking is, maybe it's a small little portion of a community that you like. And that's what we're trying to emulate at Vista Field, with kind of like we talked about earlier, the narrow streets, the sidewalks that are very encouraging to people walking. When you can get into Vista Field, and it's going to be pretty soon when we start to open up the the streets in there. There's going to be some little narrow streets that first time you drive in with your car, you're going to say, am I supposed to drive on this thing, or is this all for pedestrians? What you try to do is create these areas where there's a blending, because when you do that, the cars slow down and the pedestrians feel comfortable. So you try to do this thing, this development where people want to be there. And that's, I suppose, called placemaking. And, you know, I think segueing into the second part of your question, Karl, is, you know, when are we going to be open for business? It's taken us a while to get there because this is one of the few new urbanist developments in the Northwest. There's another one in Spokane, Kendall Yards. It's a couple years ahead of us, but they take time. But the good news is sometime after the first of the year, we're going to have property ready to go. Like I say, we're going to go out there and pound the for sale signs into the ground. We'll have some property that people can purchase. And what you try to do is come back to that place. And what we've done when we've looked at Vista Field is we've looked at some other places across the Northwest or across our great nation that have a sense of, you know, excitement where people want to be. There's some stuff in Seattle. There's some stuff in Miami where our consulting team is from. You know, everybody knows about San Antonio and the Riverwalk and things like that. So we're trying to capture, you know, little snippets and pieces of other great places and bring back here to our community. But the other thing you have to remember is it's got to be authentic. It's got to be a tri-city creation. We can borrow some ideas from other folks, but it's got to be something that our community feels comfortable using, because without people, I don't think there's any placemaking. So you have to be able to attract people there. So hopefully I've covered your question.
No, totally. And that was a great explanation of placemaking too, because I think that means a lot of different things to a lot of people. I think you put it in a really good context for sure. We got a question for Gary specifically on the wharf and the potential farmers market there. And the question is, does the redevelopment of downtown farmers market in Pasco decrease the need for a project, or is there a connection and tie-in? Is it the same group, or what's the concept there, Gary?
Yeah, so public markets and farmers markets are related. They're kind of on a spectrum. With farmers markets, you know, you can just have you know, people set up a shade structure and have a farmer's market, but public market normally is a structure. We think about Pybus Market in Wenatchee, Pike's Place Market, which is a really good example, a really well-known market. So we were working with a group of citizens who was interested in getting a public market. One of the things we did was a study of putting a market down at the wharf or in downtown Pasco, excuse me. And what that study came out and said was the wharf was a better location in the long term, but it needed to have things around it that a public market can't sit on its own, right? So we talked, you know, Tim talks about Kendall Yards or this sense of place. So you have to have some residential development and some commercial development, and those things kind of have to feed off each other. So you can't just put a public market out in a blank place and have it attract the people you need. So we're still working on, you know, the port's still proceeding because there was some basic questions that we had, like the wharf that sat in front of the public market, and people had this vision of people being able to go out on the wharf and having live music, and, you know, well, we needed to make sure it wasn't going to like fall into the river, because that would be what we would call bad. So that's what we're doing now. You know, we're doing that study. We're doing some of the work. So I wouldn't say, you know, it's just going to be a long slog. And I think the folks who are interested in public market kind of get that, but they're looking at other options and seeing if it takes fire somewhere else. And the city of Pasco is getting ready to make major investments in that farmers market pavilion in downtown Pasco. And so I think that's going to be an amazing project.
Yeah, so the two projects you'd say would be complementary. It wouldn't necessarily be a competition, that the public market kind of a different role than a farmer's market generally.
Yeah, so we would like the you know, the farmers market, the Pasco farmers market, which was the first one in the TriCities, is going to stay where it's at. It's going to be in downtown Pasco. So we'd have the public market. So what we were really trying to look at was the connectivity of downtown to the waterfront. Because sometimes communities will redevelop their waterfront and it's at the expense of their downtown.
Sure.
In such a way. And all our downtowns are a little off the river. And so we wanted to make sure we were looking at ways. And one of the ideas somebody came up with, was talking about micro transit, like the little scooters that you see around communities, the ones you can rent, or bikes that you can just hop on, that allow, so, if you're like a mile apart, that's a little too far a walk for many people, like just through empty space. But if you have, bikes or scooters or something that people can hop on one space and go to another space, it makes those a lot quicker. So, yeah, we would want both projects to support each other.
Gotcha. Let's maybe shift gears a little bit. Miles, you mentioned the research district before with Port of Benton, but could you give us a little more background or like the mission of the research district and how, kind of what some of the goals or projects that you work on with the research district specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So the TriCities Research District was initiated in 2007. At the time, it was a partnership of several of the ports and cities and universities and colleges in our area. And still many of those folks are members of the research district, or at least engage in some level of coordination with companies that are located there. The research district itself, we consider kind of a connector of business entrepreneurship and technology development. There's a lot of overlap between what the university is doing, what Pacific Northwest National Laboratory is doing, that we want to be able to leverage as really a showcase for the entire community's capability. I know capability has been kind of a big topic that you and I have been discussing, and many of our partners. But I guess to us, as important as placemaking is, it's important for us to be able to market outward what our technical capability is for attracting businesses that can support the Hanford site transition, that can leverage new technologies that come out of the Pacific Northwest National Lab, that can connect with other research parks all around the world. The research district itself is a nonprofit entity that the Port of Benton supports administratively. So I am at the same time the executive director of the TriCities Research District. We also were just a few years ago, we were I guess registered or designated as an innovation partnership zone, which is a partnership with the Department of Commerce in Washington State to showcase Washington-based technology and entrepreneurialism. That really gives us more of a regional, statewide, and national presence. We're able to connect with the Association of University Research Parks. We're able to showcase our strategies of businesses located there. And really, it's just a really substantial marketing tool for the commercialization opportunities of Tri-Cities area businesses. One point I always really try to reinforce with everybody about the research district is that while its boundaries are North Richland and encompassing many of the industrial and tech area in North Richland, we wholly consider the research district a Tri-Cities venture. Gary has served in the past on the Tri-Cities Research District Board, and we have several folks from outside of the immediate district boundaries that assist us in showcasing technology throughout the community. One of our members is also Ron Boninger from Carbitex. That is a Port of Kennewick tenant. And it's a really good opportunity for us to showcase what we're capable of here. I don't know if I've said capable too many times, but it is truly a good opportunity for the community.
I appreciate it because, you know, you did kind of like make up and create swivel instead of pivot. So I think that gives you extra credit for, you know, you can say capable many more times that way.
Perfect.
We're down to about 7 minutes, but let's do one real quick topic and then we'll give everybody a chance to wrap up. But really want to thank everybody today. Let's talk about COVID just for a moment. And from the port's perspective, do you see some changes come out of this? And maybe we'll start with Tim. I know we met at now I'm spacing on the name, I'm sorry, but we met and had a food truck lunch, which was great with social distancing and everything else at Columbia Gardens, right? Is that right? Yep. And we talked about, you know, as you develop property or you develop property with partners, come out of COVID as an example, are we all going to need as much office space? You know, I mean, we're remote here. I think that's been a trend we've all read about, but just real quickly before we do the closings, can everybody talk a little bit about what do you see coming out of COVID, and does it alter or change, you know, some of your development plans? Just looking at like who might be your future partners or tenants coming up. You want to kick us off on that one, Tim?
Sure. Yeah, Carl, thank you. We did talk about that. One of the things that I want to say is there's so much that we don't know about COVID. And one of the things that I get asked all the time is, well, what is Port of Kennewick doing about COVID? What are your thoughts on it? And I'm going to tell you something that I learned from a city attorney. I was on a conversation back in March, April, when COVID really first took off. And this person said, remember something, ports, cities, you're not a health agency. You're not supposed to dive so far into the COVID situation that you are, you know, jumping ahead of your local health district. So one of the things that I think we've been careful at Port of Kennewick is to not try to have our own detailed COVID plan. Obviously, we react to what we see. We try to look ahead. But at the national level, there's a bunch of confusion, and rightfully so. At the state level, we've seen our governor doing the best he can with the information he has, but there's been some inconsistency. So one of the things I'm very careful about is at Port of Kennewick, we'll be very cognizant of it, but we'll follow the advice of those folks that are professionals in the industry. We won't come up with our own COVID this, that, our own COVID newsletter. We're not going to act as if we are experts in global pandemics or the health field. We're economic development people. So the best thing we can do is faithfully follow the advice of those that are leading us, and our local health department's done a good job with it. So I don't want to sound like I'm preaching to folks, but there are really things that ports are not supposed to know. We're not supposed to be lead agency on a number of things, and this is one that I really think that we shouldn't get too far ahead of our skis trying to tell people all the stuff we know at Port of Kennewick about COVID. We have to be faithful followers of those that are most in the know. Now, having said that, we will be doing business differently than we have in the past. We're already doing it differently. We're looking at rent relief for some of our tenants. We're looking at potentially, you know, here we are kicking off the Vista Field development, and things are going to slow down. We may not have as much need for commercial space. So we're going to have to rethink these things on the fly. And I think what we're going to do at Port of Kennewick is get as much information as we can from reliable sources about what the economic and business impacts might be. But again, you know, it's like you're in a dark tunnel trying to feel around, and then they say, describe what you see. Well, hard to do. So we're going to try to get the best information we can, and it will probably be of limited value because I'm a huge believer that this is a very, very unique virus and situation that we're in front of, and we have to be kind of cautious working our way through slowly. My hope is that in a number of months we start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And while I've got the floor here, I want to say that, you know, well, we at the Port of Kennewick have been healthy and our customers have been healthy. There's folks in our community that have really suffered losses, whether it's losses of jobs or loss of a family member. So I really, all of us at Port of Kennewick, I know the other two ports the same way, we grieve for those in our community, our state, nationally and globally that have suffered a lot from this. And, that's the main thing. I think we keep our fingers crossed. And, for all of us at the ports, if we can say at the end of the year at our performance review times, we've kept our staffs healthy and our customer base healthy, that'll be how we get judged. Thank you.
No, that's well said, Tim. Thank you. Gary, Port of Pasco, any changes or just, quick insights? What do you think is going to change, or, way you do business, or even with your tenants?
So, so a couple of us participated in the WIDA conference a couple weeks, 3 weeks ago, I think 4 weeks ago. And we had Richard Florida, who is an author, researcher, pretty well known in the economic development field. And he was talking about 40% of the workforce is now working remote. And when we come out of COVID, which eventually we will, only half of that's going to come back. So 20% of our workers are going to be remote. What are our offices going to look like? We've already gone from, let's see, about a decade ago, there was roughly a little under 200 square feet per office worker. And we were already before COVID down to 100 square feet. I mean, people were working, on laptops, and so you didn't have offices. So yeah, I think you're going to see big changes coming in, like the office environment, which was one of those commercial environments, and you're going to see big changes in retail. We're going to have a lot of big boxes left open, which is where and how we're going to fill those. And we've done pretty well in Tri-Cities, and there's an Amazon call center and Walmart. There's the Titanium guys, grocery store, but we're going to have more of those. And what are we going to put in? And I think what we're going to see is this specialty manufacturing kind of entering into those spaces. So we got to be a little more flexible in our zoning, but it is going to be a different environment. And we're at 10 o'clock, and I don't want to take any more time, but I do want to give a shout out to industrial. Like, we haven't talked about that at all, and that was traditionally a port activity and still very big for the Port of Pasco. We're developing the Ryman Industrial Center to recruit large manufacturing, and we have like Big Pasco where we're making major investments, which is this kind of unique flex industrial space. So I just want to give a shout out to those two things.
No, for sure. And that's, we could probably talk for 4 hours about all the things that you guys are doing, for sure. And that's a great shout out to their industrial partners too, Gary. Thanks. Miles, how about Port of Benton, changes coming out of COVID? What do you see coming out of this?
I'll keep it short since we're already at 10 o'clock, but I just wanted to say, yes, real estate in the office environment is going to fundamentally change, but there's still a lot of confusion. As many people will tell you that, nobody's going to be going back into offices and working the same way. There's 50% of those that are saying that we're going to need more office space because people are going to have to spread out. And yet, either way, there are going to be fundamental changes, and we've just got to be responsive and kind of work through the confusion to identify the opportunities there are in our real estate space. I'll just quickly note, for at least our COVID response, we have kind of followed suit with the other ports. We are, adding hand sanitizer in the buildings that we own and things like that. That make it easier for people to work as they do return to the office. But the biggest thing is we're just trying to communicate as much as we can and let people know that we're still working, whether we're working from home or not. We'll be launching our new website next week, and we're the last ones. Port of Kennewick and Port of Pasco both updated their websites to communicate better to the community about what projects we're working on and the things that we're involved in. We are transitioning almost 100% to digital communication. So I encourage everybody to sign up for our newsletters online. I know I've received newsletters from Port of Kennewick and Port of Pasco with relevant information all the time in a very quickly changing environment. So I just appreciate everybody bearing with us as we learn through this process.
You bet. Thanks, Miles, and that's well said. we are a little bit over the time, so I just want to thank everybody for your time today, and really thank you all for your partnership. I think we've all spoke very well about how we work with each other and how we, we're all focused on these opportunities coming up in the future, and then being quick to change as we go through these COVID times, and then come together even more as we come out of it. Thanks everybody again for your time. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. And I do want to give a big shout out to Gary, who fortunately for our partners in Spokane, but unfortunately for us, because Gary is a Tri-Citian and has a long history of great projects and work here in the Tri-Cities. So Gary, thanks for your focus and really devotion to the Tri-Cities, and best of luck in Spokane. And I know that when you're up there, we're just going to have a stronger connection for all of our Eastern Washington partners working together and doing some great things on this side of the Cascade. So thanks, Gary.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Congrats.
Thanks very much.
You bet. Thanks everybody again. Have a great weekend, and we'll be back next Friday at 9. Thanks.